Welcome to this presentation about Khidr, the green one. He is quite a legendary figure, and he is described by God as a person who has been given mercy and direct knowledge from God himself. You see him in different folklores, figures that are similar to him, and also in myth like St. George. So let's get into it. Here's the overview of my presentation. I will start with the original story and the translation of it, then get into the layers of meaning and understanding, because it's quite a difficult story to understand. On the surface it seems a very simple little story, but it goes very, very deep. There's a symbolism of the fish, which is kind of how the story starts, and then there's the moment, of course, the legendary story of him meeting Moses and the events that happen. And I will relate his actions also to you as a person, because the story is not just about some historic or religious event, it is about you as well as a person. Then I'll get into a philosophical, psychological, spiritual view from different people like Carl Jung, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Ibn Arabi, and I'll get into how a spiritual figure relates to you. And then I have some examples from Hinduism and Buddhism, and then I will get into the changes in grammar, which is more a text analysis at the end of the story, and I will relate it to a Hadith al-Qudsi, and then I'll end it with a few historic notes, the Epic of Gilgamesh and St. George, and some other people that mentioned him, and I will end with some other folklore issues where you see that this figure, which is very complex and mysterious to understand, actually is everywhere once you start paying attention. And before we start, I want to say that God knows best. If I'm right, then it's from God, and if I err, that's from me alone, and God is all forgiving and merciful. So, the name, let's start there. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, said he was named Al-Khidr because he set upon a barren white land, and when he did, it became green with vegetation. So his name isn't actually his name, it's more of a description of his qualities. Now, here's the original text, the original story that we will analyze. It doesn't seem like much, but this has given rise to an immense reality and many different legends and tales. And actually, it connects back to ancient times, which is surprising. Now, the original text is meant to be recited, so I put it in the video. You can fast forward through it if you don't want to listen to it, but I felt like it was appropriate to do. The recitation is by Sheikh Shuraim, and he's one of the reciters in Mecca, a very famous one, so that's why I put it in here. So we'll listen to the original recitation. You can fast forward to it if you don't want to listen to it, and then we'll get into the translation and the analysis of it.
وإذ قال موسى لفتاه لا أبرح حتى أبلغ مجمع البحرين أو أمضي حقبا فلما بلغا مجمع بينهما نسيا حوتهما فاتخذ سبيله في البحر سربا فلما جاوزا قال لفتاه آتنا غداءنا لقد لقينا من سفرنا هذا نصبا قال أرأيت إذ أوينا إلى الصخرة فإني نسيت الحوت وما أنسانيه إلا الشيطان أن أذكره واتخذ سبيله في البحر عجبا قال ذلك ما كنا نبغ فارتدا على آثارهما قصصا فوجدا عبدا من عبادنا آتيناه رحمة من عندنا وعلمناه من لدنا علما قال له موسى هل أتبعك على أن تعلمني مما علمت رشدا قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا وكيف تصبر على ما لم تحط به خبرا قال ستجدني إن شاء الله صابرا ولا أعصي لك أمرا قال فإن اتبعتني فلا تسألني عن شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرا فانطلقا حتى إذا ركبا في السفينة خرقها قال أخرقتها لتغرق أهلها لقد جئت شيئا إمرا قال ألم أقل إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا قال لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت ولا ترهقني من أمري عسرا فانطلقا حتى إذا لقيا غلاما فقتله قال أقتلت نفسا زكية بغير نفس لقد جئت شيئا نكرا قال ألم أقل لك إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا قال إن سألتك عن شيء بعدها فلا تصاحبني قد بلغت من لدني عذرا فانطلقا حتى إذا أتيا أهل قرية استطعما أهلها فأبوا أن يضيفوهما فوجدا فيها جدارا يريد أن ينقض فأقامه قال لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا قال هذا فراق بيني وبينك سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا أما السفينة فكانت لمساكين يعملون في البحر فأردت أن أعيبها وكان وراءهم ملك يأخذ كل سفينة غصبا وأما الغلام فكان أبواه مؤمنين فخشينا أن يرهقهما طغيانا وكفرا فأردنا أن يبدلهما ربهما خيرا منه زكاة وأقرب رحما وأما الجدار فكان لغلامين يتيمين في المدينة وكان تحته كنز لهما وكان أبوهما صالحا فأراد ربك أن يبلغا أشدهما ويستخرجا كنزهما رحمة من ربك وما فعلته عن أمري ذلك تأويل ما لم تسطع عليه صبرا.
Alright, so that was the original text, and here's now the translation, and I will read. And remember when Moses said to his boy servant, I will not give up until I reach the junction of the two seas, or until I spend years and years in traveling. But when they reached the junction of the two seas, they forgot their fish, and it took its way through the sea as in a tunnel. So when they had passed further on, Moses said to his boy servant, Bring us our meal. Truly, we have suffered much fatigue in our journey. He said, Do you remember when we betook ourselves to the rock? I indeed forgot the fish. None but Satan made me forget to remember it. It took its course into the sea in a strange way. Moses said, That is what we have been seeking. So they went back, retracing their footsteps. Then they found one of our servants, unto whom we had bestowed mercy from us, and to whom we had taught knowledge from us. Moses said to him, May I follow you, so that you teach me something of that knowledge which you have been taught? He said, Verily, you will not be able to have patience with me. And how can you have patience about a thing which you cannot encompass with your knowledge? Moses said, You will find me, God willing, patient, and I will not disobey you in any way. He said, Then, if you follow me, ask me not about anything till I myself mention it to you. So they both proceeded, till, when they embarked the ship, he scuttled it. Moses said, Have you scuttled it in order to drown its people? Verily, you have committed a bad thing. He said, Did I not tell you that you would not be able to have patience with me? Moses said, Call me not to account for what I forgot, and be not hard upon me by raising difficulties in my affair. Then they both proceeded, till they met a boy. He killed him. Moses said, Have you killed an innocent person who had killed none? Verily, you have committed a truly evil thing. Khidr said, Did I not tell you that you can have no patience with me? Moses said, If I ask you anything after this, keep me not in your company. You have received an excuse from me. Then they both proceeded, till when they came to the people of a town, they asked them for food, but they refused to entertain them. Then they found therein a wall about to collapse. He, Khidr, set it up straight. Moses said, If you had wished, surely you could have taken wages for it. Khidr said, This is the parting between you and me. I will tell you the interpretation of those things over which you were unable to hold patience. As for the ship, it belonged to poor people working in the sea, so I wished to make a defective damage in it, as there was a king after them who seized every ship by force. And as for the boy, his parents were believers, and we feared lest he should oppress them by rebellion and disbelief. So we intended that their Lord should change him for them for one better in righteousness and nearer to mercy. And as for the wall, it belonged to two orphan boys in the town, and there was under it a treasure belonging to them, and their father was a righteous man. And your Lord intended that they should attain their age of full strength, and take out their treasure as a mercy from your Lord. And I did it not of my own accord. That is the interpretation of those things over which you could not hold patience. There is so much to be told about the story, it seems like an infinite well, as you might notice in this presentation. For example, this story links to other Quranic verses. In Surah Ar-Rahman, which is the 55th chapter, he had loosened two seas. They meet. There is a barrier between them. They encroach not one upon the other. There is a tradition, which also called hadith in Arabic, that according to which Moses, on whom be peace, was rebuked by God for having once asserted he was the wisest of all men, and he was subsequently told through revelation that there was a servant of God who lived at the junction of the two seas, who was far superior to him in wisdom. When Moses expressed his eagerness to find that man, God commanded him to take a fish in a basket and to go on and on until the fish would disappear, and its disappearance was to be a sign that the goal had been reached. As for the junction of the two seas, which can also be a geographical description, I will focus on the allegorical explanation. The two seas represent two sources or streams of knowledge. One obtainable through observation and intellectual coordination of outward phenomena, which is called ilm as-sahir, and the other one through intuitive mystic insight, ilm al-batin, the meeting of which is the real goal of Moses' quest. So there's two different types of knowledge. You could say earthly one, spiritual one. I won't be able to go through it all. It's also very much possible that I have not got all of its meanings captured here because it's, like I said, very much an infinite well. So be curious and search for yourself. I will give a wide view in this presentation, but whatever triggers your mind the most, maybe it's more than one thing, make sure to follow that feeling and go on a quest. The deepest layers of meanings I will not be able to tell you, because in the same chapter it is mentioned that if the sea were ink for the words of my Lord, sooner would the ocean be exhausted than would be the words of my Lord, even if we were to add upon it seas upon sea. Now, let's get into the symbolism of the fish. The verse goes, but when they reached the junction of the two seas, they forgot their fish. It took its way to the sea as in a tunnel. The fish is an ancient religious symbol. It's a zodiac sign, it's a Christian symbol, it's a Hindu god as well, and the first avatar of Vishnu. And the book of Tobit, where Tobias and the archangel Raphael catch a fish in the Tigris, they also use it as a healing power to cure Tobit of blindness. Carl Jung wrote in his book about archetypes and the collective unconscious that the fish is a symbol of living content which lies hidden in the unconscious, and when released brings renewal and rebirth. It seems to be a synchronicity that shows the soul wanting to go back to its source, like as if the soul goes back to the ocean, if you will, the ocean of God. Now, I have a tip to pause the video to read text in the coming slides. I'm not going to go through all the text and read them because they're more for reference, but you can pause the video and read the whole thing. I would suggest that sometimes to do. Now, this is a chapter of the Quran called Al-Araf, and there's a reference between Moses and Muhammad, peace be upon them both, mentioned in this chapter 7. And this is a few verses before there's a story about fishing on the Sabbath day. The story goes that Moses' people made a calf, a golden calf, as an idol to worship. He came back with a tablet from Mount Sinai and was enraged when he saw the idolatry. And the inscription on the tablets was a guidance and a mercy for those who were God-fearing, yet they were worshipping an idol. Then the following story happened. Moses chose 70 of his people, and they prayed to God for forgiveness. And then there is a moment which says, follow the messenger, the unlettered prophet, whom they find mentioned in their own scriptures, the Torah and the Gospel. And there are some references there of the Old Testament and the Gospel where a new prophet is mentioned. And then this little section ends with, of the people of Moses, there is a section who guide and do justice in the light of truth. So in the story, it is explained that God talks about a new prophet coming. Then the story continues, and asked the people of Moses concerning the towns situated along the sea, how its people profaned the Sabbath. For on the day of their Sabbath their fish did come to them, openly holding up their heads, but on the day they had no Sabbath they came not. Thus we did try them because of their disobedience. So you see the theme of a fish coming back in the story of Moses. And this is slightly after it is mentioned that he prayed after the golden calf incident, and God talked about the unlettered prophet. So could it be that the fish that Moses was carrying was caught the correct way, because of course he's a prophet of God who would do it the correct way, before he made the journey to find Khidr? And in that moment he was asked who was the wisest man, and then God said there was someone who knew more than him. Could the quest for Khidr be looking for the Mohammedan reality, the unlettered prophet? This is outside the scope of this presentation, so let's move on. But there was a theme of the fish in the story of Moses before. Then the story continues. He said, "Do you remember when we betook ourselves to the rock? I indeed forgot the fish. None but Satan made me forget to remember it. It took its course into the sea in a strange way." So something very obvious, something very strange happened, yet he forgot to mention it. How come you miss it by forgetting? How come you forget such a thing? It seems that an overactive mind that is rushed will easily miss the signs that you are looking for. Because Moses said, "That's what we have been seeking," and they went back retracing their footsteps. The word retracing shows they missed it on the path they were walking, thus they were actually walking on the right path, but simply missed it. Could it be the mind doing it to itself, like an inner devil, or an outer force having more power on a mind that is rushing to find something, even if it is knowledge? Food for thought. So now we get into the station of Khidr, of who he was. He's described as one of our servants, and another translation is a servant from among our servants. So he's one of more. So he's one of the servants, not the only one, with his position, and he's described as someone unto whom we had bestowed mercy from us, and whom we had taught knowledge from us. First, it mentions mercy, rahmah, which is also translated as compassion, grace, love. So first he receives grace, love from God, and then laduna ilma, which is knowledge through the presence of God. It's a very clear sequence here. And one of our servants shows that there's more out there. I'll get into what a servant is a bit later. The word abd, which is the Arabian word, is wrongfully translated as slave, as a slave is forced and a servant does so willingly. That's the thing I've noticed. But think about this idea. They have rahmah, love, frequency from God, bestowed from God, and their knowledge is directly given in their head, their heart, their soul. Good question. And their knowledge is directly given. But since it's directly given, can it be taught to someone else? Then moving on the story, good characters is a requirement. Moses said to him, "May I follow you, so that you teach me something of the knowledge which you have been taught by God." And then he goes on a few verses later, he says, "You will find me, God willing, patient, and I will not disobey you in any way." The journey can only begin for someone who has good character. It seems one cannot force this path to open for oneself, like you can do with other knowledges. You can sort of force it. But here it seems the door will only open to a person with good character. And Moses is showing his excellent character by asking permission, "May I?" and then showing his earnest, "Will not disobey you in any way." Also, he's very wise to see that he's about to enter a new realm, for lack of better terms. So he adds the "God willing," which is mentioned earlier in the chapter. I will now go through the events through a different lens. In order to do that, we need to do a quick recap of Moses' life events leading up to his prophethood. So it starts in a terrible situation where his people are being killed. So his mother puts him in a little handmade boat up the river as a baby. He was stranded at the shore of the Pharaoh's house where he was taken in. So he was raised up in a royal home and grew up to be a strong man. He saw an injustice happening, his people were slaves and one was being beaten. He interfered and accidentally killed the guard. He fled Egypt and came to a town exhausted and saw two young women by a water well. The men around the watering place were rude and did not let them pass, and then Moses, with his excellent character, even in his exhausted state, could not handle seeing this, and he fought his way through the crowd and helped the women get water. He then prayed to God. He was then hired by the father of these women. And then he got lost in a desert. He sees a fire, goes to the fire, God spoke to him, and his prophethood officially began. So these three events, significant events, happened before he reached his prophethood, right? His mother putting him in the river, accidentally killing a guard, having to flee, helping those two women, and getting a job, basically, in a different town, and then getting hired by the father of those women, which is also the start of his new life away from the Pharaoh, which of course, as he reaches prophethood, returns back to. Now here's an interesting thing. Everyone wants this higher level knowledge, but it's not so easy to get because you are in your own way at each step. Every time your character gets in the way and then you get triggered. Here's an analysis of what I mean. So they both proceeded till, when they embarked the ship, he, Khidr, scuttled it. Moses said, "Have you scuttled it in order to drown his people? Verily you have committed a bad thing." The boat, to drown his people? His mother put you in a boat through inspiration and trusted God, and here you are. He wasn't aware that this was his own life. He wanted knowledge that Khidr had. And Khidr does something that mirrors his own life event. Also later, Khidr explains that a king was going to seize all the boats, so there's a bit of a damage, so they saved their boat, so it was not actually a loss. The king also mirrors the Pharaoh's violence towards Moses and his people, and he was saved by a little boat on the river. And in this case, these people are also saved, that they didn't lose their boat from a king who wanted the boat for war. Then they both proceeded till they met a boy. Khidr killed him. Moses said, "Have you killed an innocent person who had killed none? Verily, you've committed a truly evil thing." The boy. Moses killed a man. This is not an accident. It was God's will. God even explained this to him later, that it was all fated to happen. He wasn't fully aware that it was all fated to happen, where he explained even to the Pharaoh that it was an accident, even though God guided his hand. You see? So this event mirrors an action that Moses did. But he's not aware that the killing of the boy is reflecting himself. Then they both proceeded till when they came to a people of the town, they asked them for food, but they refused to entertain them. Then they found her in a wall about to collapse, and he set it up straight. Moses said, "If you had wished, surely you could have taken wages for it." The wall. Why did he want a wage for the work done? Did Moses not do things without asking anything back? Remember the water well where he helped those two women? And he got back a lot more. And again, this is mirroring his life. There's two people, in this case it was orphans, in this case there were two women, not strong enough to stand up for themselves, and he's helping them. Of course, in this case with the wall, Moses didn't know it was done for two orphans, but it was mirroring him, and he didn't know it. And of course, doing something without asking something in return is of course something he already did. He just didn't understand it in this moment. There's many more layers of meaning. There's many more reasons, because he got hungry and fatigued. Remember, the fish disappeared. He was hungry. And he was not hungry at the Mount Sinai when he fasted for 40 days and 40 nights and he got the 10 Commandments. So there's a very big significance here that he got hungry here. But again, that's too much and out of the scope for this presentation. Now, like I said, you're in your own way. At each step, think about what triggers you. That's what holds you back. A lot of things that trigger you, not everything, but a lot of things, are mirroring you, your inner self. And this story is not for you to criticize Moses. It is about you. You are the people in the boat. Some setback protected you, if only you knew. You are the boy being killed. Seeds of thought that will grow out to be a terrible character that you would get killed off as a mercy. You lose parts of yourself that were not good for you. You are the orphan, needing protection. Spiritually, you're still an unprotected child. You need protecting before you can handle a bigger treasure. It's not real gold that's underneath. The sleepers of the cave are called youths, but were they just young physically or also spiritually? They needed protection. These orphans needed protection, just like you need protection. So this whole story actually is about you. And it shows a lifetime of experience, and we'll get into this a little bit later. Now, here's the philosophical, psychological, and spiritual view. These are very interesting from great thinkers from back in the day, from different areas in the world. So it's a very fascinating thing that they all came to the story of Khidr. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, one of the greatest literary minds in the history of Europe and the world, in a somewhat modern time, a couple hundred years ago, he wrote a collection of poems which is called the West Eastern Divan. In the poem, he describes Khidr as someone who drinks from the fountain of youth and is associated with wisdom that transcends time. Is a spiritual figure who leads seekers to eternal life or deeper understanding. And his references to Khidr are actually scattered throughout the work, which reflects Goethe's interest in Islamic mysticism, which is not a secret, but he also knew of Khidr and understood the story of Khidr really, really well. Here's a translation of the poem that is translated into English. The original is in German. North and west and south are upbreaking, thrones are shattering, empires quaking. Fly thou to the untroubled east, there on the patriarch's air to feast. What with love and drink and song Khidr's fount will make thee young. Now, the figure of Khidr is sometimes translated as a Kaiser, um, so you might miss it, which in German would be pronounced as Khizr, which makes sense that it's spelled that way. And in this context, the way he uses, he's an immortal sage, drawing from the Islamic legends surrounding Khidr. The psychological view of Carl Jung is very, very interesting. I was very surprised to find it. Of course, he's a man of extensive knowledge and a lot of analysis. So he's written about many religious stories and analyzed them in great depth. And here's a few examples. Again, you can pause the screen if you want to read it carefully. I have the references of the books also. In his book Psychology and Alchemy, in chapter 3, he analyzes dreams of a person. He does dream analysis. And here's a dream about somebody dreaming about there's a treasure in the sea. Remember the sea theme? The sea. There's two different seas coming together. And there's a treasure hard to attain. He takes a plunge and he finds it. And he talks about the ego finding a mate in the self. For at first the self is a strange non-ego. The self is the higher self, your complete personality, not your ego personality. Now his analysis goes on the next page, and he mentions other stories, Krishna and Arjuna from the Bhagavad Gita, which is a similar pattern, the disciples on the road to Emmaus. And these two stories have a similar pattern, you can look them up. But he goes deeper on the Moses and Khidr story that we just did in the beginning of this video. And he talks about that the treasure in the sea, the companion and the garden within the fountain, and the garden with the fountain are all the same thing, the self. Moses of the Quran also sought and found beside it Khidr, as one of our servants whom we had endowed with our grace and wisdom. Now you can read this page and it's just a fascinating thing. There's also a reference of John 7:38 where the source of living water is mentioned, which Moses was looking for. So this is across all religions a theme, even in very deep layers of psychology. This was actually a story of Wolfgang Pauli, the physicist who won a Nobel Prize, who was also one of Carl Jung's patients. In his book Flying Saucer, which was published a bit later, the collective world psyche is rapidly undergoing change, and people started seeing UFOs, right? And he wrote a book about the psychology behind this. And the theme of the primordial man seems to become more important. And he talks about Elijah, which is also an Islamic figure who's similar to Khidr, actually, who's also an Islamic figure. In Arabic, he's called Ilyas, who's also a immortal figure, basically. You have the Messiah, Jesus, of course. Khidr, so he speaks him there. He wanders over the earth as a human personification of Allah. The mediator is necessary due to the great tension of opposites within the psyche. You can probably feel this in yourself. There's things in you clashing. So you need a mediating figure, like a Khidr, to help you become whole again. And this concept is also in Hinduism and Buddhism quite relevant. We'll get into it a bit later. And he realized in his older age, and the world going through rapid change also with technology, he realizes that all these stories speak of one truth, spoken in many languages, that psychologically, because he is a psychologist, you need a mediating figure in your higher self to make you whole again. And when you read the page, he talks about in the West you will have to say Christ instead of self. In the nearest it will be Khidr. In the far east, Atman or Tao or the Buddha. In the far west, maybe a hare or a mundamin. And in Kabbalism it will be Tiferet. And he talks about how the world is shrunk because there's so much more interconnectivity, which nowadays is a lot more than even back then. And it's dawning on us that humanity is one with one psyche. So it makes sense that the story of Khidr, which explains this so well, is known throughout all these great thinkers from all ages. Now let's move on. Again, I can talk about this for ages, but we have to move on. I would highly suggest reading those books though. Now, lastly, on the psychological view, there's another one where the story is used. So the entire story of Al Khidr is used. This is actually from Jung's final book, Man and the Symbols, where chapter 3 was written by Marie-Louise von Franz, who was a psychologist as well. And she explains this story of Al Khidr as well. So the exact same story that we just read. Looking at the story naively, one might assume that Khidr is a lawless, capricious evil shadow of a pious law-abiding Moses. But this is not the case. Khidr is much more the personification of some secret creative action of the Godhead. And she uses this story within a chapter, there's context needed of course, but she uses this story because it sums up the experience of a lifetime. So in dreams you get snippets of this whole story. So this story, even though it's not a particularly long story, sums up the experience of a lifetime, which is very, very rare to get in all your dreams. So now you have it, you might not even need to dream anymore. Now, I can talk about this for hours, but we have to move on. I would highly recommend you reading the books though. They're very good reads and very interesting, especially the last one, Man with Symbols. It's a very easy read, written for the public, so it's worth the read, especially if you're interested in the psychological view on subjects like this. Now, the spiritual view is of course different because the psychological view has to be backed by science. You cannot just make up psychological facts. The spiritual view, of course, goes into a higher realm. And Mevlana Rumi famously said, Moses' difficulties became solved, and Khidr gave him the key to every question in a way beyond telling. It's a very mysterious way of thinking about it. But Khidr gave him the key to every question, but in a way beyond telling. So he gave him the key, but not with his words, but with his actions, because Khidr is in the presence of God, just like Moses is, but in a slightly different way. Because of course he's a servant who has been given grace and knowledge from God. So the way he's conveying it is not through speaking it and talking about it, it's through his actions, through his presence. And Rumi, his teacher, said, Blessed is the one who finds such a servant, and who holds the story of Moses and Khidr in his heart and makes it his imam. This is of course a spiritual teaching, not a psychological teaching. Psychologically this might not make sense, but this story is not just a wise lesson. It's an actual thing you can keep in your heart and follow and learn from constantly, like a living thing. And for Rumi, Shamsi Tabrizi was his teacher. He was his imam, you see? And where did he get it from? He got it from, among other things, from this Quranic story. Another spiritual view from Ibn Arabi, very, very famous mystic and scholar of Islam. He lived almost 1,000 years ago. And he eventually even met Khidr. And apparently he's not the only one, which shows that Khidr is an immortal figure you can meet. A very interesting story, I'll just read it very quickly. I was in a boat in the port of Tunis. I had a pain in my stomach, but the people were sleeping, so I went to the side of the boat and I looked out over the sea. Suddenly I saw by the light of the moon, which was full that night, someone coming toward me on the surface of the water. Finally he came up to me and stood with me. First he stood on one leg and raised the other, so I could see that his leg was not wet. Then he did the same with the other leg. After talking to me for a while in his own language, he saluted me and went off, making for a lighthouse on the top of a hill over 2 miles distance from us. This distance he covered in 2 or 3 steps. I could hear him praising God on the lighthouse. He had often visited our Sheikh al-Kinani, an elder of the order who lived at Marsa Idun, from whose house I had come that evening. When I returned to the town, a man met me, who had asked me how my night with Khidr on the boat had been. what he had said to me and what I had said to him. Very, very mysterious story. So this man, who didn't live in the time of the prophets, met Khidr. And in his own language. What does that mean? Khidr talks to him in his own language. It's a language of spiritual states. The term shows a distinction between instruction, like you would instruct someone how to fix a car, and spiritual guidance. Spiritual guidance works with patience and silence. The instruction works with theoretical concepts and questioning, and there's a big difference here. There are many Islamic mystics who have met Al-Khidr. And I use quotes on the word mystics because it's just people who have done a deep dive with their own soul, and their language becomes quite mystical, as the story you just read, and that's why they're called mystics. And by these stories, and I've read many of them from many different mystics, it seems there's a hidden spiritual order which consists of these servants, and they all experienced this. Either they found one of the servants unto whom we had bestowed mercy from us and whom we had taught knowledge from us, or they had become one of the servants that had been bestowed mercy and knowledge directly from God. Now, in the Carl Jung text, it was already touched upon, but Ibn Arabi specifically associates Khidr with Elijah, which is Elias in Arabic, Jesus, Isa in Arabic, he's the Messiah according to Islam as well, and Enoch/Hermes, which is Idris in Arabic, peace be upon them all. This is a group of 4 immortal prophets. So keep that in mind that Khidr, along with these 3, is in a different category of immortal prophets, according to Ibn Arabi, and this is not just according to him, many people have noticed it, even Carl Jung noticed it, that psychologically this is a thing, and alchemists of old also spoke of this. Now, each one of these 4, you can imagine stories about Jesus, is an endless ocean of knowledge. I cannot go further in this presentation, but go explore yourself. You have the names now, go explore them endlessly. You'll find you will not get to an end of this ocean of knowledge. Ibn Arabi goes on his works on even more mystical stories, and also writes about in his Futuhat and also Fusus al-Hikam, the Bezels of Wisdom. Should you want to learn more about the spiritual text, you can read those. They're quite difficult to understand. It requires quite a lot of knowledge and self-knowledge, and perhaps the same struggle that Moses had with understanding Khidr, you will have with understanding these texts. But such a thing should not stop you from getting more knowledge. Now, your higher self equals the guru, equals the saint, equals the sheikh. This is a universal concept. I think I've made it clear enough. Here is an overview of other words used for these masters. So, in Islam, in Sufism, they call these sheikhs. So not the sheikh like an oil sheikh, but a spiritual elder is called a sheikh. In Hinduism, they're called gurus and avatars. In Buddhism, they're lamas, and also virtuous friends, kalyana mitra. In Taoist, you have the perfected masters, Sun Tzu or Junzi. Hasidic Jews also have authentic masters, Sadiqs, which Sadiq is also an Arabic word, means truthful. And the Eastern Orthodox Christians also have elders, which are called startzi. As you can tell, this is a common theme, and this concept, which is not well understood in the Abrahamical religions in its current state, and a bit more in Hinduism and Buddhism, it's a bit more central, is actually the connecting line between the religions, as far as I can see. And I'll get into it a bit more later. So, a saint, like Khidr, a servant of God, or all the other names you just saw on the previous slide, is like a mirror, right? But it's a lot more complex than you attract what you are. So a saint, a guru, a sheikh is not really there. It's just a mirror. As much as you can handle, he will mirror back to you. The difference between a teacher and an enlightened being, for lack of better terms, is that the servant, sage, the guru is the way. He's not telling you what the way is, he is the way. Because when you talk to him, he mirrors back you. He has no attachment to either life or death, because you see, you are the guru. And note that I'm using the word guru now, because sheikh, servant, sage, it's all the same thing. So you are the guru when you are with one. You hang out with yourself because there's nobody at home there at all, to the extent that there's hanging out, so in the interpersonal sense. So let's say there's you and I hanging out. There's two people. When you hang out with a servant of God, he's not there. He's mirroring you. All you can be seeing are your own desires. He is a perfect mirror, since there's nobody there. I'll get into this explanation at the end. If you don't fully grasp this, I will give another explanation at the end, and I think I'll make it fully complete. Now, in Hinduism and Buddhism, this is a common theme, yet not well understood by them either. I've asked around, and usually the answer is more like, yes, there's a spiritual person, and they'll bring you to God, they'll bring you to enlightenment, but it's not fully understood well by the general public, I should say. Now, I'll give a few contemporary saints. They are no longer alive, but they're more contemporary of this era. A very famous one is Shirdi Sai Baba. He was revered by both Hindu and Muslim people in India at the time. He lived in an abandoned mosque. One thing that I have noticed is that these people that have become saints or enlightened, whatever word, they almost never have a given name. Khidr means green. Shirdi Sai is named after the town he lived in. The town, of course, is called Shirdi. It's way beyond the regular human identification, it seems. And again, just him is a whole ocean of knowledge as well, so you can look him up. There's books written by followers of his you can read, should you be interested in that. Because like I said, anything that triggers you, go follow it. So when you look at this picture and it triggers you, go follow it. Another very famous story is the book Be Here Now by Ram Dass. Steve Jobs loved this book, and it became a very big cultural impact in the West because he was quite a famous person at the time. He passed away recently. He started as a psychology professor at Harvard. He did a whole lot of LSD and other psychedelics. At the time that was new, and this became this huge thing in the hippie era. He hit a ceiling each time. With his psychology, there was a ceiling he hit, and he couldn't help people, couldn't help himself, even with all the theoretical knowledge. Then the psychedelics, they thought they had discovered something, but again, you keep doing it, after a while you hit a ceiling. Eventually he meets the man who's enlightened. As you can see in this picture, his name is Anim Karoli Baba. He writes about his story in his book Be Here Now. It's a short story, it's a very, very interesting story. And in the story really encapsulates the journey one gets to finding an enlightened being. And once you find him, it's not necessarily easy, just like when Moses met Khidr. But it's a common theme, and this might seem like a very different type of story, but in essence, it's very, very similar. The Buddha. Onto Buddhism, the Buddha, very, very famous. Everybody knows the Buddha. In fact, there's so much to be said about the Buddha. Again, it's beyond the scope of this presentation. The Persian historian Al-Shahrastani, who also studied Hermetic and Indian religions, suggested a comparison between Khidr and the Buddha. So this is almost 1,000 years ago, so this is not a new thing that people have made this comparison. Both are linked to a quest for enlightenment that succeeds. So Khidr and Buddha, they found enlightenment, and now they've become immortal in the spiritual realm, and they help people on the path. And both have immortal qualities, and both have many appearances throughout time. Although the difference is that Khidr does seem to appear physically to people more so than just in visions. The way the Buddha is described does not fit a prophet of the scripture, like Moses or Muhammad, but the high spiritual quality of both puts them on par with each other. Though the story of Khidr is older, there is a spiritual quality, for lack of a better term, that connects these two. Although the story of Khidr is older, when you look at the teachings of the Buddha and the way it's being taught, there's a lot of this mirroring, if you will. The teachings you get from the Buddha who is enlightened is not book knowledge. It's not instruction knowledge, but it's mirroring you to as much as you can handle. Which means everybody who goes to a person who is enlightened gets a completely different lesson, because it's what your soul needs. No matter what you do, you need someone to show you the way. You need someone who's already a doctor to teach you if you want to become one. Same with any other job. It's a very simple idea, of course. You need to learn how to read and write if you want to become a writer. Even the reading and listening you're doing, you couldn't have done it without someone else helping you, your parents, to teach you how to talk. Now, spiritually speaking, this is true, too. You cannot move past that point without someone helping, yet in a modern day time, people forget this principle, especially those part of a religion. But there's a difference between a teacher, master, and a spiritual master. With the former, you must ask many questions when you fail to understand it. in class, you need to ask questions when you don't understand something. With the latter, you just follow patiently and stay silent, which is what Khidr explained to Moses. And this way of teaching is quite unknown, perhaps because a spiritually enlightened person, a true servant of God, is rare. One thing you might have noticed or might not have noticed is that Khidr changes in grammar. In his explanation, Khidr says to Moses, "So I wish to make a defective damage in it." Then he goes on, "We feared lest he should oppress them by rebellion, so we intended that their Lord." Yeah. And then, at the end, the final explanation about the wall, he said, "So your Lord intended." And then he ends the explanation with saying, "And I did not do it of my own accord." So first he uses I, then he uses we, and then he uses your Lord. So he first goes to himself, to God and me, to just God. And yet, it is all the same, because he ends it with, "And I did not do it of my own accord." So even the first one he explains that he does it. Then the second one he uses we, and then he has your Lord. He says, "I did not do it of my own accord." None of it. It's all the same. How come? Khidr achieved what Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, described in Hadith al-Qudsi, which is almost a Quran level but not quite revelation. On the authority of Abu Huraira, Allah, mighty and sublime be He, said, "Whoever shows enmity to someone devoted to me, I shall be at war with him. My servant draws not near to me with anything more loved by me than the religious duties I have enjoined upon him. And my servant continues to draw near to me with supererogatory works, so that I shall love him." And there the explanation comes. When I love him, I am his hearing with which he hears, his seeing with which he sees, his hand with which he strikes, and his foot with which he walks. Were he to ask of me, I would surely give it to him. Were he to ask me for refuge, I would surely grant him it. And I have highlighted it green. Here it is explained. When God loves you, Rahmah, that Khidr received, remember first the Rahmah, He becomes your hearing, your seeing, your movement. You're basically channeling God, for lack of a better term. And Khidr achieved this in ancient times. There's other legends that he found the fountain of youth, which is why he's immortal, but he achieved this. And all his actions are that of God, and this is why some people have mistaken these holy figures as a personification of God, because their hearing, their eyes, their movement is actually all God. It's no longer their ego doing anything. The I, the we, the Lord, all becomes one. And through this story of Khidr, God is showing a model that one can use to attain a higher station. Now, Khidr and all the other saints, sheikhs, guru, whatever term is used, are in the presence of God. Now, the story has it, legend has it, that Khidr asked God for Surah Al-Fatiha, which counts 7 verses and contains the entire Quran, and other sages also asked it. But it could only be given through Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. After this, they're ready to go and leave Earth and be one with the Source. So the Prophet granted them this, but he said no. Help my nation, and thus Khidr still guides people to this day. And Khidr is much older than when Islam started, but has now become an integral part of it through his mention in the Quran, and he belongs to the Ummah, the nation of Muhammad. Now on to some historic things that I found very, very interesting and very much related to this, which seems to be the exact same story. Now the Epic of Gilgamesh is about 4,000 years old, based on the earliest written evidence that we have. So while the standard version we know today is at least 3,000 years old, the core stories themselves go back over 4 millennia, making it the oldest surviving literary work in human history. So it's older than the Bible, but also much older than most ancient Egyptian texts, which is fascinating. It carries great mysteries of the Anunnaki and different symbolism. All these things, again, way too much to get into. Now I have to make this note. Working through these ancient stories and connecting them is always going to be guesswork, to a point. However, I'm trying to show common themes. Since they seem to link, you can make up your own mind. And it's really cool and interesting, so why not do it? So I used the translation from Sophus Hella from 2012. This is tablet number 11, because there were different clay tablets found. Some you can actually find in the British Museum, I think it's called, or Natural History Museum in London. Now, the story of Gilgamesh is quite lengthy, and I'm not going to focus on Gilgamesh, I'm focusing on a person he's looking for. Also, as a side note, I could not find these texts online, so I used pictures of my books, which is why you see pictures of books instead of proper texts, because I couldn't find them. Now, it starts with an earnest quest, Gilgamesh, and there's a big story behind it. It's tablet number 11, so I'm skipping 10, because this is the point I wanted to show you. He asks the man, Utanapishti, tell me, how did you find eternal life in the gathering of gods? He gets tested, and initially he fails the test by falling asleep immediately. And he gets sent back, but his wife, of this enlightened man by the fountain of youth, tells him to give him something to come back home. And then he says, I'll tell you a secret, Gilgamesh, and reveal what the gods keep hidden. There's a plant that looks like a thistle, whose thorns, like a wild rose, hurt your hand. If you can find and pluck this plant, you will win back your life force. When Gilgamesh heard this, he dug a shaft down to the Apsu. He tied heavy stones to his feet, they pulled him down to the Apsu. So there's a theme of the boat, right? A little bit above what I highlighted. Gilgamesh raised the punting hole and brought the boat back to shore. And mercifully he receives guidance. And at the bottom of the sea is a plant, which gives him immortality. So there's merciful guidance, there's the boat, and there's the bottom of the sea. Moses was on the boat on the sea. And here's another question. When Khidr scuttled the boat, and it was sinking, what if he would just have said nothing and they sank to the bottom of the sea? Who knows what he would have found there? Maybe he would have found this. Gilgamesh dives down, and now he finds the plant, green, Khidr, which supposedly gives eternal life. And remember the dream that Carl Jung talked about, somebody's dream who dove down? He takes a break to eat and made camp after many miles of travel. A snake snatched it and shed its skin, became anew, which is also a satanic theme, because the snake, the serpent, this evil, was being less aware in a state of hunger, tiredness, which Moses expresses in the story, and then the forgetting happened. You see, all these themes are the exact same. Unlike Moses, Gilgamesh seems to be unable to retrace his steps. There's YouTube videos on the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's a good story to read, but it kind of ends, but his quest for immortality ends here, because he was unable to retrace his steps. And he ends with, now all around us the tide has been rising. When I dug the shaft, I threw away all tools. And if I went back, how could I find the same spot? I even left the boat on the beach. He rushed and left everything behind, so he could not retrace his steps. Another very fascinating thing is that it seems very obvious that Saint George and Khidr are the same person. The famous saint that slew the dragon. There have been entire research papers written on this subject. Here's a lot of information. I will not get into it because I don't want the video to be even longer. But it all points to one thing. The saints crossed the boundaries of time and culture and guided people everywhere. So the story of Saint George takes place in the Middle East, but he also guides people in the Western countries, you see. Interesting fact, the dragon might actually be a winged snake, as dragons, especially in Oriental traditions, are good creatures that help people fight satanic forces. That's a fact that I just found very interesting as well. That even that, killing of the dragon might be more complex than you think. So like I said, every story is another ocean of knowledge in and of itself. Now, New Age gurus mention him, Osho, who was famous in more recent times. He passed away, but he was very famous in the West, and the story of Moji is very famous. You can find it online on the websites his followers have dedicated to him. But these stories about Khidr that seem to have never been told before are spoken by him, which is very fascinating. Maybe it's true or not, but the point is that it seems no matter where you go, you'll meet Khidr on your spiritual journey, or someone like him. And even in fantasy, I'll keep this part of it shorter, but in Lord of the Rings there is a character of Tom Bombadil who's not in the movies. He's described as the Master, and this is in the Fellowship of the Rings in chapter 7. And Frodo asks who he is, and then Goldberry asks he is, as you have seen him. Tom Bombadil is the Master. And then later he asks Tom Bombadil who he is, and he says, "Eldest is what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees." This ancient character. The interesting thing is that once you know the story of Khidr and you start to internalize it, you start seeing hints of this truth everywhere. Even in the most famous stories, like Lord of the Rings, there are these characters that are very mysterious and remain unexplained. Sometimes they're so mysterious you can't even put them in a movie because it wouldn't make sense anymore. Yet without them, the stories would not be complete, for the higher level of psychology and spirituality requires them. Now, the story of Al-Khidr takes place in the chapter of the cave, but there's other stories before and after the sleepers of the cave that I did touch upon slightly, and then after the stories it goes on to another story about Dhul-Qarnayn. The sleepers of the cave, obviously the chapter is named after them, is a cave theme, and Dhul-Qarnayn has a sun theme, and of course the story of Khidr has the seas theme. Unfortunately, it's all beyond the scope of this video, but the journey continues. I just wanted you to know that this story is not in isolation in a chapter. This is part of a greater whole. You probably have seen signs of Khidr without realizing it. The more you pay attention, the more you see him. His dome has been on television many times, yet he remains a mystery. There's a small hexagonal dome built in the 16th century on the dome of the rock plateau, next to the northwestern arch gate to mark the spot where a man of God, was mentioned in chapter 18 of the Noble Quran. Al-Khidr used to pray. The dome is based on 6 marble columns, including a niche built with redstone inside. It's the only dome structure in the Haram al-Sharif exhibiting a hexagonal plan. Most of the dome structures in the Ottoman Jerusalem are octagonal in plan, which again shows he's glitching the matrix. Like, he is so unique. Even his dome is different. It's a hexagonal shape, which I guess is a more natural shape anyway. But you can see it in Palestine. It's standing there, and you probably might have seen a glimpse of it on television, the whole world has, without even knowing who it belongs to. So I'll end the presentation with some final thoughts. Did Khidr succeed in imparting the true meaning of these events to Moses? Since he explained that Tawil to Moses, does it mean that he also received it? If he did, was it not because of the witnessing? Perhaps where the two seas meet, there is a reconciliation of all dualities, inner, outer, good, evil, absent, visible. And there, the mediator and the mediated, Khidr and Moses in this case, are one and the same. This is what Carl Jung tried to say. The ego being the higher self, but they're part of one and the same whole, psychologically speaking, spiritually speaking. The sheikh, the guru, is only mirroring you. The only moments they were not was when Moses was questioning. I dare not make a conclusion here, since I'm still very much learning, but I want you to think about it. But remember, this story is about you. So the biggest question you have to ask yourself is, did you succeed in understanding the layers of reality in this story for yourself? This story is about guidance, and since the Holy Book is literally for everyone, it means that in principle this level of guidance is available for everyone, at each level. Through meditating on these verses, you'll get closer and closer to self-understanding, and perhaps one day receiving divine love, Rahmah, and direct knowledge from God's presence, Ilm Laduni. Thank you.